Marcus had always been terrible at first impressions. When he walked into the gleaming lobby of Henderson and Associates on his first day, clutching his briefcase like a life preserver, he felt the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. The receptionist, a perfectly polished woman with silver hair, looked up from her computer screen with practiced efficiency. "You must be the new marketing coordinator," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Patricia. Welcome to Henderson and Associates." Marcus opened his mouth to respond with his usual nervous energy, but what came out instead was something entirely unexpected. Oui. Yes. Thank you very much. I am Marcus." The words tumbled out with what could only be described as a French accent. Not a good one, but unmistakably attempting to be French. Patricia's eyebrows lifted slightly, her smile becoming more genuine. "Oh, how wonderful. We don't often get international hires. Your English is excellent." Marcus felt his face flush, but something strange happened. Instead of correcting her, he found himself nodding. "Merci. Thank you. I have been practicing very much." The lie hung in the air between them like morning mist, and Marcus waited for it to dissipate. Instead, Patricia seemed charmed. She personally escorted him to the elevator, chatting about how refreshing it was to have some European sophistication in the office. By the time Marcus reached the third floor, he had somehow committed to being from a small town near Lyon, and had mentioned something about missing proper French bread. His new supervisor, Janet, greeted him with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for celebrities. "Marcus, Patricia told me you're from France. How exciting." Janet, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, practically beamed at him. "We're so lucky to have someone with international experience join our team." Marcus found himself trapped in his own fabrication, nodding along as Janet explained how his European perspective would be invaluable for their upcoming campaign targeting international markets. She introduced him around the office with obvious pride, and each introduction deepened the deception. "This is Sarah from accounting. Marcus is from France. Marcus, meet David from sales. He's been to Paris 3 times. Oh, Marcus, you simply must meet Jennifer. She studied abroad in Marseille." Each person he met lit up with interest, sharing their own French experiences or asking about his homeland with genuine curiosity. Marcus found himself improvising details about a childhood he'd never had, nodding knowingly when David mentioned the crowds at the Louvre, and even managing a passable "Ah, c'est magnifique" when Jennifer gushed about the Mediterranean coast. The strangest part wasn't that he was lying. Marcus had told plenty of white lies in his life. The strange part was how naturally the accent seemed to flow once he'd started. Years of watching French films with subtitles, a semester of French in college, and countless hours of listening to French music seemed to coalesce into something resembling authenticity. As the day wore on, Marcus noticed something else. People treated French Marcus differently than they had ever treated regular Marcus. They leaned in when he spoke, laughed more readily at his observations, and seemed genuinely interested in his opinions. When he mentioned in the break room that American coffee was interesting but different, 3 people immediately offered to show him their favorite local coffee shops. By 5 o'clock, Marcus had somehow agreed to bring in some authentic French pastries the following week and had been invited to 2 separate happy hours where people wanted to hear more about his homeland. As he packed up his desk, Janet stopped by with a warm smile. "Marcus, I just wanted to say how delighted we are to have you on the team. Your fresh perspective is exactly what we needed." She paused, then added with a conspiratorial whisper, "And between you and me, I think having someone with your background will really impress the clients." Marcus nodded, his stomach doing small flips. "Of course, I am happy to help however I can." As he walked to his car in the parking garage, Marcus told himself he would come clean tomorrow. He would casually mention that people had misunderstood his accent, laugh it off, and everything would go back to normal. But as he replayed the day's interactions, he realized something unsettling. French Marcus had experienced more genuine human connection in 8 hours than regular Marcus had managed in months at his previous job. He sat in his car for a long moment, watching other employees drive away, and wondered if one more day of being French would really hurt anyone. 3 days later, Marcus found himself standing in the French section of a local bookstore at 7 in the morning, frantically memorizing basic phrases before work. What had started as one more day had somehow stretched into nearly a week, and the lie was growing more elaborate by the hour. The previous afternoon, Sarah from accounting had cornered him in the copy room with genuine excitement. "Marcus, my daughter's taking French in high school, and she's struggling with pronunciation. Would you mind helping her sometime? She'd be so thrilled to practice with a native speaker." Marcus had smiled and nodded, his throat dry. "Of course, I would be honored to help." Inside, panic was setting in. He was going to have to teach French to a teenager when his own vocabulary barely extended beyond ordering coffee and asking for directions. Now, clutching a pocket French dictionary and trying to memorize the difference between avoir and être. Marcus wondered how his life had become this complicated. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister Claire. "How's the new job going? Mom wants to know if you're settling in okay." Marcus stared at the message. He'd told his family about the job, but hadn't mentioned his newfound French identity. How could he explain that he was living a completely different life 40 hours a week? That he'd somehow become more popular and respected as a fake Frenchman than he'd ever been as himself? At work, the deception had taken on a life of its own. Janet had started including him in higher-level meetings, specifically requesting his European insights on marketing strategies. Yesterday, he'd found himself nodding sagely as the senior partners discussed expanding into international markets, occasionally throwing in phrases like, "In France, we approach ZIS differently," and "Z European consumer has different expectations." The terrifying part was that people were listening, really listening. When regular Marcus had tried to speak up in meetings at his previous job, he'd been ignored or talked over. But French Marcus commanded attention. His opinions were treated as valuable insights rather than random interruptions. During lunch that day, Marcus sat with Jennifer and David, who had become his unofficial cultural ambassadors. They peppered him with questions about French politics, cuisine, and social customs. Marcus found himself weaving increasingly elaborate stories about his fictional life in Lyon, complete with details about his imaginary family's bistro and his supposed university studies in Toulouse. "I miss the small markets," he said, picking at his sandwich. "In France, we buy fresh bread every morning, not this, what do you call it? Wonder bread from the plastic bag." Jennifer nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly what I loved about living in Marseille. The morning routine of going to the boulangerie. It's so much more civilized than grabbing a granola bar and rushing out the door." David leaned forward. "Marcus, you should totally start a blog about the cultural differences you notice here. I bet it would be fascinating." The suggestion sent a chill down Marcus's spine. A blog would leave a permanent record of his lies, create an online presence for French Marcus that could be easily discovered and debunked. Perhaps someday, he managed. "Right now, I am still, how you say, adjusting." That afternoon, Marcus received an email that made his blood run cold. Janet had forwarded him a message from their biggest client, Hartwell Industries. They were interested in meeting with their French marketing specialist to discuss strategies for entering the European market. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. Marcus sat at his desk, staring at the email until the words blurred. This had gone too far. He was about to be exposed in front of important clients, and when that happened, he wouldn't just lose his fake French identity. He'd probably lose his job entirely. He started typing his resignation letter 3 times that afternoon, but each time he looked around the office and saw his colleagues, people who had become something like friends for the first time in years, he couldn't bring himself to finish it. Sarah had brought him homemade cookies to remind him of home. Jennifer had invited him to her book club. David had started learning French phrases to practice with him. At 5:30, as Marcus was gathering his things to leave, Janet appeared at his desk with a smile that somehow managed to be both warm and slightly predatory. "Marcus, I have some exciting news," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of enthusiasm that usually preceded more work. "Mr. Hartwell himself wants to meet with you next Friday. He's very interested in your perspective on European luxury markets." She paused, studying his face. You don't look as excited as I expected. Is everything all right? Marcus forced a smile, his accent feeling thicker than usual. Of course, I am just surprised. It is a big opportunity. It certainly is, Janet agreed. This could be a real career maker for you, Marcus. I hope you're ready to show them what French expertise can do. As Janet walked away, Marcus slumped in his chair. He had exactly 1 week to either become genuinely knowledgeable about European luxury markets, confess his deception, or somehow pull off the performance of his lifetime. None of these options seemed particularly achievable as he packed up his things and headed for the elevator, wondering how a simple mispronounced introduction had snowballed into the defining crisis of his professional life. Marcus spent the weekend in a state of controlled panic, alternating between crafting resignation letters and frantically researching European luxury market trends. By Sunday evening, surrounded by printed articles, French business magazines he couldn't fully understand, and 3 empty coffee cups, he had come to a sobering realization. He couldn't pull this off. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Marcus sat in his car in the parking lot, hands trembling slightly as he practiced saying, "I need to tell you something important about my background." But when he walked through those office doors and saw Sarah waving enthusiastically from the reception desk, the words died in his throat. "Marcus, how was your weekend? Did you get a chance to call your family back home?" Sarah's genuine warmth hit him like a physical blow. Oui," he managed weakly. It was very nice to hear their voices. The week crawled by with agonizing slowness. Each day brought new complications. Jennifer had signed him up to judge her book club's discussion of a French novel he'd never read. David had arranged for him to meet his French teacher friend who wanted to practice conversation. Worst of all, Janet had scheduled preliminary meetings with the Hartwell team, building up Marcus's credentials and promising insights that he couldn't possibly deliver. By Thursday, Marcus had developed a persistent headache and the kind of anxiety that made his stomach feel like it was filled with broken glass. He'd been French Marcus for 2 weeks now, and the identity had become so entrenched that he sometimes caught himself thinking with the accent. That afternoon, everything unraveled in the most unexpected way possible. Marcus was in the break room, mechanically stirring sugar into his coffee, while rehearsing his confession speech for the 100th time, when he heard a familiar voice behind him speaking rapid, fluent French. He turned to see a woman about his age talking animatedly on her phone, gesturing with one hand while holding a steaming mug with the other. She finished her call and noticed him staring. "Oh, sorry about that," she said with a slight French accent that was unmistakably genuine. "I hope I wasn't too loud. I'm Camille, by the way. I just started in the graphics department this week." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. A real French person. Here. Now. When his elaborate deception was about to reach its crescendo. "I'm Marcus," he said, his fake accent sounding absurdly theatrical next to her natural one. Camille's eyes lit up with delight. "Marcus, everyone's been telling me about you. It's so wonderful to meet another French person here. Where in France are you from?" The moment stretched like taffy. In it, Marcus saw his entire carefully constructed world about to collapse. He could continue the lie, risk exposure by someone who would immediately recognize his terrible accent and fabricated cultural knowledge, and probably face an even more humiliating revelation. Or he could end it now, with this stranger who didn't yet have any investment in French Marcus. "Actually," Marcus said, his voice coming out in his natural accent-free American tone, "I'm not French at all." Camille blinked, clearly confused. "I'm sorry?" The words tumbled out of him like water through a broken dam. "I'm from Ohio. I've never been to France. I accidentally started speaking with a fake accent on my first day. People assumed I was French and I just never corrected them. For 2 weeks. And now I'm supposed to meet with important clients tomorrow as their French marketing expert. And I don't know anything about European markets. And I can't even order a croissant in proper French." Camille stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus braced himself for outrage, disgust, or laughter. Instead, she started to smile. Then the smile became a chuckle. Then she was laughing so hard she had to set down her coffee cup. Mon Dieu, she gasped between giggles. That is the most ridiculous and wonderful thing I've heard in months. You've been fake French for 2 weeks? It's not funny, Marcus said miserably, though he found himself fighting his own smile at her infectious laughter. I'm going to lose my job. These people actually like me, and when they find out I've been lying to them. Oh, but Marcus, Camille said, wiping tears from her eyes. Don't you see? They don't like you because you're French. They like you because you're you. You just happened to be more confident when you thought you were someone else. Over the next hour, Camille helped Marcus craft a plan. She couldn't make him actually French, but she could help him navigate the client meeting with some basic cultural knowledge and, more importantly, help him figure out how to come clean to his colleagues without destroying the relationships he'd built. The next morning, Marcus walked into the Hartwell meeting with Camille by his side. He'd introduced her to Janet as a real French colleague who could provide additional insights. As the meeting began, Marcus took a deep breath and did something he'd never done as French Marcus. He told the truth. Before we begin, he said in his natural voice, I need to make something clear about my background. I'm not actually from France. I'm from Ohio, and 2 weeks ago I accidentally gave everyone the impression that I was French. Rather than correct a simple misunderstanding, I let it grow into something much bigger. The room fell silent. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he continued. I realize this is unprofessional, and that I've wasted your time. I understand if you want to proceed with someone else. Mr. Hartwell, a silver-haired man in his 60s, studied Marcus for a long moment. Then he started to chuckle. Son, in 40 years of business, I've never had someone start a meeting by admitting to an elaborate identity fraud. That takes either tremendous courage or tremendous stupidity. Probably both, Marcus admitted. Well, Hartwell said, the question now is, can you do the job without the French accent? 3 months later, Marcus still worked at Henderson & Associates, though now as his genuine self. The revelation had initially caused quite a stir, but his colleagues had ultimately been more amused than angry. Sarah still brought him cookies. Jennifer still invited him to book club, and David was learning Spanish instead of French, figuring Marcus had already exhausted his fake European persona quota. Janet had initially been furious, but when the Hartwell campaign turned out to be their most successful international launch ever, thanks in part to Camille's genuine cultural insights and Marcus's surprisingly solid marketing instincts, she decided to forgive his creative interpretation of cultural identity. Most surprisingly, Marcus discovered that regular Marcus was actually quite likable when he wasn't paralyzed by the fear of being uninteresting. The confidence he'd found while pretending to be French hadn't disappeared with the accent. It had simply become part of who he was. He still couldn't order a croissant in French, but he'd learned something more valuable. Sometimes the person you're pretending to be is just the person you're capable of becoming, accent optional.
Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more interesting content coming soon.